Hello and welcome to this episode of UX Conversations, in which we invite our guests to share insights about their work and experience, and about their experiences in leading and inspiring design teams as well. My name is Akar Rudolf. I'm director of the UX Design Awards and head of strategy at International Design Center Berlin, the organizers of the awards. In this episode, I'll be talking to Oliver Kulpi, head of experience at Valtech Germany, and fresh on the jury of the UX Design Awards Autumn 2023. So, hello, Oliver. Welcome to this episode.
Hello, Ake. Nice to be here.
Oliver, you're a seasoned strategy executive working on large-scale digital transformation projects. You once founded, I found out, the first web design agency of New Zealand. So this is something that I would love to hear more about. But then you went on to work for diverse industries such as mobility, manufacturing, luxury, and healthcare. So quite diverse. And your work ranges from, I mean, just about everything: driver assistance tools, business to customer solutions for OEMs, but also for luxury brands, but even life science and healthcare. And today you're leading the experience design team at Valtech. It's a global business transformation company, and you're working on the intersection of technology and human-centered design. So it's quite an impressive story, but I guess that the beginning is really interesting. So New Zealand, the first web design agency, how did you get into design? How did this start?
This is a good question. So I probably have to start a bit earlier. I actually have always, as long as I can remember, been quite attracted by design and by creative topics. And it always has been clear that I want to create and shape something in my professional life. I can remember also technology has always been a very important part in my life. So it was probably at the age of 14 when I built my own IBM 386 computer and I taught myself coding. So technology and design has always been something that pushed me further. So after school, classically, I went to these portfolio reviews at an art school in Germany, and I watched how a so-called design expert put down portfolios that, to me, looked much more talented and crafted than my own. And I also saw how he praised portfolios that were dull in my eyes. So before he turned to my portfolio, I packed my stuff and walked out of the door. This was the moment where I realized art school is probably not the right place for me, where I should belong. Because I knew I had talent, but I needed to learn more the kind of like the technology side of things, and I needed to dive into practice. So eventually I joined HdM in Stuttgart, which was absolutely the right decision for me back at that time. I quickly got into trainee jobs. Did a lot of internships. I actually, one of my first internships was half a year working for Television New Zealand in New Zealand, Auckland, and got to know a lot of people in the industry. And eventually, after my studies, I decided to move to New Zealand. So I lived there for quite a while. And together with a friend, we thought it would be time to set up an own company, which was New Zealand's first web design company back in 1996.
So that was a little bit, well, I think simultaneous with the .com bubble starting somehow in Europe. A bit before.
That was around the 2000s. That was a bit before, yeah. So basically, we started building websites for real estate agencies. So we did a lot of real estate business. Then started a little bit getting into some kind of e-commerce. I mean, that was still in the early days of the internet, of course. Yeah. So it was a lot of trial and error, as you can imagine.
So you're a self-taught designer, or would you describe yourself as a designer at all?
No, actually, back at HdM, I mean, we had also design courses. We had a lot of trainings in classic media back at that time. So there was like a lot of film design, film history, film production topics, television production, but also Gestalttheorie, topics like these were also covered. But the interesting thing was it was a combination of design topics and technology topics, and that really appealed to myself. And if I would have to tell some young people what should I do, I have the feeling I'm talented, and also your environment is reflecting that. Get into practice, try to get trainee jobs, learn on the job, and learn the technology part of things, because you might also realize that art school isn't exactly what you need.
Well, you never know how your career develops, and it's almost never a straight alley, even if we might think that we have most of what we do planned. It's quite an illusion, I guess. But it sounds like your story really somehow led you to where you are right now, right? Because Valtech is also not like a strict design consultancy. It's a technology-based firm. So maybe you can describe your organization a bit and what you do there now.
Exactly. Yeah, it is kind of a coherent and consistent continuation of my early days, combining big tech and design and creativity into very specific offerings of our times, namely in the space of digitalization. Now, talking about Valtech, I mean, the good thing about working in such an international digital agency, and I think this probably applies to many agencies of this caliber, you get to work in very diverse and also multidisciplinary environments, and you obviously learn a lot on the job from other peers, other people with kind of like different backgrounds. You get to work on very new technology topics, and you also have this international aspect, working cross-border on projects, basically on a global scale. And I think a lot of my colleagues appreciate that. And I also have always been eager to work in such an environment because it gives you inspiration from all sides and all angles, and helps you to grow on a constant basis.
Yeah, and speaking of growing, I mean, it wasn't only at Valtech. Already beforehand, you developed into team leads, and now leading a whole division, the experience design department. And in that realm, talking to you as a design leader, I mean, everybody's talking about the importance of design strategy and that designers should grow into strategic roles. But and some organizations and many more are starting to, they actually recognize the importance of design strategy. Many still don't, at least not on executive levels. So I'm wondering what changed for you when you first started in a first really design leadership role. Can you track this a little bit? Was there something like a big change where you said like, wow, this is new and this is stuff that I'm not ready for, surprised. I have to fake it until I make it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely the case in our industry, in the digital business. There is kind of like a constant evolvement of technology, and you basically have to continuously learn and also unlearn certain things. I mean, if I remember kind of like all the software tools that I used in my career, some of them still exist. Most people don't even know the names anymore. So there has always been the need to adapt to change, adapt to new tools, which probably is the case for a lot of professions, but especially in this area, I think you need to be ready to flexibly adapt to change and to also new possibilities, new challenges. And this is what I like about the industry, that it keeps you busy, keeps you learning, and also keeps you young in some ways. And I think this applies not only for leadership, but also for all kinds of levels. And yes, of course, if you are younger and you kind of like, you're a digital native, you grew up with digital tools, some things might feel much easier for you than for old people like me. But that shouldn't stop you. I mean, there's still ways to get into topics and to get a better understanding of it. And referring to your question about more strategic thinking, I mean, if I think back in the days when we founded the web design company, I mean, it basically was about setting up a good-looking website. Now, what is good-looking today? I mean, we have usability, we talk about usefulness of things, but then also it should be, emotionally appealing. And to combine these things, you have to get a deep understanding, first of all, of your audience, of your users, but then also you need to understand kind of like the business case behind it, and combine all these angles into a strategic direction. And I think when you now even add the point of insights gathering and data, then you probably understand that what I mean when I say that the role of a designer definitely has to change, because all these aspects, empathy for users, deep understanding of technology and business, as well as being able to really read data and interpret data in the right way, these are the skills that will be required in the future to develop what we would call good design today and in the future, of course.
So how should designers, is there something you would say can designers do to prepare to grow into that direction, apart from constantly learning? But it's not only about tools and methods, isn't it? And knowledge. There is much more, because you're also leading people and you have to filter and you have to moderate. So there's a lot more to it, isn't it?
So I think a key aspect is, at least I see that in our company, is cross-functional teams, really bringing different disciplines together so that they can learn from each other. Not everybody is born as a data scientist, but you can learn and understand from data scientists how to understand and read data and how to make data useful, as well as a technologist can learn from a UX designer how to develop empathy for users and how to apply that in their work, how to code something so that it's actually better usable. Yeah? So I think this cross-functional aspect is one thing. Second trait, which I would expect is definitely a key ingredient for any good designer, is open-mindedness. Just be open for all kinds of aspects in life, not only the aesthetic part of things, not only the beauty part of things, but really everything that shapes good design and is important to make good design decisions.
Well, Oliver, you're also an expert in customer experience and customer experience strategy. And now that's a very broad area, and it's not very closely defined either. And it's, most importantly, it's a combined effort by very different business areas and roles. So my question is, who owns customer experience? Because the design, marketing, management, technology areas, they all do at some extent, which is good because they are all involved. But when everybody is the owner, then no one feels responsible. So it can happen. So what do you think is crucial to organize this in a good way?
So first of all, I think customer experience is playing a major role in everything when we think about doing business in today's world. And by the way, I mean, customer experience can be business to business, business to consumer experience. It can even be employee to employee experience if you want to go down that path. So you also have internal customers to consider as a company. Hence, if you look at it from that angle, it cannot be just in the ownership of one single entity. It needs a joint effort because, again, to make customer experience successful, you need, again, to have a deep understanding of the business in which you are in, a deep understanding of the market, how it works, the industry that you serve for. You need to have a deep understanding of your customers/consumers, meaning you need to do research on those consumers. And when I say research, it's not just about reading stats or doing a survey, NPS, and so on and so forth, but it's also doing qualitative insight gathering to empathize with your audiences, to understand their needs, their pain points in doing business with you. Then obviously also technology plays into the game, because doing business with digital means is obviously only feasible with the technological foundation. So here again, also, how do people interact, with which tools do they interact, and what can technology actually simplify and serve for? If you think about the topics of chatbots or AI tools that can simplify certain processes, self-service processes, that's where then obviously also the technology angle comes into the game. And then last but not least, I keep repeating myself, the data is also an important aspect. So which data are customers, consumers willing to share? Which data are we allowed to use? And what do we do with the data? So is it serving the needs and the pain points of the customers? Or is it just to market certain products? Is it just used for advertising? It's also an ethical aspect that comes into the play here. So as you can see, it's multifaceted. And again, I think credo of our time is not one person can do everything. We need to closely collaboration, communication, breaking down silos. Are the key steps to create good customer experience.
So what does this mean for the designers working today? Which kind of abilities, mindsets are you looking for when you look for new people? And maybe, I mean, like, is this more like the generalist or the specialist that we need? There's a bit of a misunderstanding about this sometimes, I guess. We often say we need generalists, but then in daily work, it comes down to specialists a little bit more. Or is there no dichotomy? I mean, like, it's not that simple.
So, I mean, when you look at the area of user experience, for example, I mean, today it is quite broad in terms of all the skills that are considered part of user experience. And it will become more and more difficult to be and to stay a generalist. I would say there has been kind of like, at least I see that in my work environment, a tendency to focus more on specific skills and areas and go deep in these areas. You probably have heard the notion of T or M-shaped mindsets, where someone obviously has in certain areas a deep understanding, deep knowledge, and can tackle that on an expert level, but also from a mindset perspective is also able to connect the dots to associated skills. And I think this mindset is crucial for being successful in the future world. Because I mean, you definitely cannot be expert in everything, and it will become harder and harder over time. Yeah? The more our world is becoming complex, especially in the digital world. And also, you may not always stay an expert in the area that you are known as an expert for, unless you keep learning. Yeah? And this is probably also something I would recommend everybody who potentially thinks about going into this industry and working in this industry. Be ready for the change. Be ready to constantly learn new things and unlearn things that you may not need anymore.
So how do you expect the work field that you're working in today to change? I mean, in the near future, maybe? What will disappear?
I think today we still see a lot of repetitive work being done manually, especially in the area of design. When you think about setting up design systems for clients, and also repetitive in the sense that we keep redoing certain things over and over again. Also, maybe the result will, of course, have a total different emotional layer, a total different branded layer, but the underlying structure, the components, the modules are pretty much the same, especially when you look into areas like e-commerce and so on and so forth. So what I expect in the future, that obviously also by means of artificial intelligence, a lot of this repetitive and more kind of like almost manual automated work will be done by artificial intelligence and can be replaced, so that we as designers can more focus on the emotional aspects of things and can put more focus on differentiation, as well as more focus on actual customer and user needs. I think this is definitely something we already see a lot. So, I mean, we've all seen examples where AI is able, from sketched wireframes, to translate that in actually ready-made components. And these kind of like first steps, we will see more and more being integrated in the design tools that we use nowadays. And hence, actually, it is a good perspective for a lot of designers who usually hate repetitive work, that probably a lot of this repetitive work will disappear. But be aware, you obviously will have to learn new things that are equally difficult, such as data, understanding data, interpreting data in the right way, and put more focus on users. I'm definitely excited to see what's coming up in the next years. I mean, looking back at how fast things have changed the past 10 years, a lot will happen. And I think what we see now in terms of metaverse, from an experiential perspective, is only a little tip of the iceberg that is going to come. Now, what this means for as designers, as well as for societies from different angles, also from an ethical perspective, and what it also means for us in terms of how we interact as human beings in the future, this is still going to be very exciting to observe, and probably we will need a lot of new ethical understanding of what we are doing, and also potentially also new standards to kind of like make sure we are delivering for people and not for technology.
Well, and that's a thin line, and it's very difficult to grasp, especially in emerging technologies, but also as designers, as you're working, or we're working for clients in the end and their business goals. And in this case, some business models even might be unethical, which maybe is the extreme, but You mentioned ethics several times already, and I think very truly so, and I'm very grateful that you did. But let me ask you then, where do you see the ethical problems coming up? Where are the areas where you would expect development, and which kind of development? Is it about regulation? Is it about frameworks? Can you say a few words about this?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back in history, I mean, it's always been the problem with innovation, that innovation comes first, and then you realize, oh, what did we start, and how do we kind of like make sure innovation serves people and not, or at least the majority of people, and not just a few people, or maybe just for the sake of innovation. And then obviously we started thinking about, so, okay, what do we need to do in terms of standards? And then at some point, policymakers followed. And I mean, we see that in the space, for example, of accessibility. Yeah. I mean, it has long been a topic being discussed here and there, but never been a priority theme. Yeah. But I think it's more than ever, these topics are super crucial. And that's where actually I think standards are not always a bad thing. I mean, usually standards you would consider as a kind of like a restriction, and it blocks you from certain things. And I think as long as standards don't dictate how something has to feel from an experience perspective, they can actually be a good foundation of common patterns of rules that actually can be beneficial for users. Exactly in the space of accessibility, I mean, think of it. In some point in our lives, we all have to face some kind of disabilities. So it actually is in the interest of everybody that this is considered. And if we wouldn't have these standards in place, we would design products that are not fully inclusive. And I don't think this is something we can afford today, nor in the future. So in terms of ethics, I think we need to be a bit more thoughtful with what we design and why we design it. And the why usually should always lead to for whom you design it and what benefits do you create for these people. If you keep that in mind, then I think a lot of the ethical discussions are pointing in the right direction. I see a lot of things not always being designed for the actual audience. They're just done quickly or without any further reflections. And obviously also some solutions don't consider the standards that are already there. I mean, we have a lot of standards, and we should actually get familiar with these also as designers, and not just ignore those.
So is that your advice also to designers? Because my question would be, how can design influence ethical decisions? Which, of course, means that designers need to understand the ethical boundaries or the problems that might arise in order to make decisions, and then in order to influence others on these decisions. So what should designers, apart from knowing existing regulations, how should they act from your point of view? What should they do to influence ethical products?
I mean, I think design is in a very important, it's in the intersection between a purpose and a solution. And it serves a purpose, but it's also a solution for people who use it. And if you take that into consideration as a designer, you obviously need to think about, is the purpose, is it from my personal perspective, but then also from a maybe broader perspective, say a general social perspective as well? is it something that I would consider ethical? Yeah. I don't see that always happening, those kind of reflections.
And I think also the crucial thing is that it's not only my perspective at that moment as the designer or the design group, but it might also be the perspective of groups of people I'm not familiar with. So it's quite important also to reach out towards other groups of people to consider the context also of their daily lives or the situations where they might use a product or a service as well, right?
True. That's where empathizing with kind of like the involved users and stakeholders is a key trait that you need to have as a designer. Really understanding what's the underlying drivers, why they want to interact with certain tools, certain products, and then obviously based on that, derive your own conclusions of what you should and what you should not design for.
Should there be like a design ethical officer in larger organizations? Are things becoming as complex, or would that be helpful?
I think that would be an interesting role. The question is, how do you recruit those people? And who should own this? What background should these people have? Because there are a lot of aspects that come into play. There are legal aspects. There are obviously, as I said, personal opinions, also the background. You obviously need to have a very inclusive mindset as such a person with such a role to drive those discussions. I have honestly not come across such a role on client side. I mean, there are obviously teams who deal with diversity and inclusion, which I think is actually exactly what we need today, to have these teams acting in that direction, on also helping as well as businesses, as well as any project team to think in the right direction, and also be aware of those topics. I think this is the key thing which is missing today, that not everybody is always aware that this should be reflected, and just making sure people start reflecting those topics, I think will then in the end lead to more accessible, more inclusive design in the future.
Well, there's certainly a great deal of awareness, at least growing in most of our societies, and this is definitely a positive thing. And I think also looking at the new generation of people now getting into work, even looking at my own children, these will be people who will take these matters very, very seriously, and that very hopefully that will change the way they think, they act, they communicate with others. Hopefully also about not only awareness but also openness. So, Oliver, thanks a lot for these insights. I think that we should bring the issue of a design ethics officer or a team or a group or a mindset or the good ghost in design into the next talk. Definitely, that's an interesting issue. But now you're also on the jury of the awards. So in some way, you will also be in a position to judge and to evaluate. And we're glad to have you on this team of great people from different backgrounds. What are you looking forward to in the jury? And what do you expect from participants? What do you expect from them to show you in order to understand a product or a solution well?
Yeah, so I'm definitely looking forward to a lot of great work that I can look at and screen in a very short period of time, which I usually in my day-to-day work don't get the chance to do so. See some of the best work that is out there in the market at the moment. And this is definitely also one of the key reasons why I decided to join, because it just also is very inspiring for myself to take the time to look at outside work and look at work of others, and also discuss it with my co-jurors in the jury, get a deeper understanding of what's the state of UX design today, and also where is it heading to? Yeah, so also identifying the trends that are coming up and so on and so forth. Now that said, obviously, I'm particularly thrilled to look at projects that, give a glimpse of the future, that kind of like take some of the aspects that I've mentioned in this talk, like focus on users and how do I do this in a smart way, as well as balancing out user needs versus business requirements. These are definitely some aspects that I'm definitely looking forward and I would expect to see in award-winning work. Now that said, of course, I'm particularly also interested in seeing some of the work of the more junior people who have just graduated or come just from university, because it's always refreshing to see these new mindsets who sometimes approach things in a totally different way. And that said, I hope to learn something from what I see.
Great. So thank you so much for a fascinating conversation and for bringing up the topic of design ethics and ethics in design. We'll take this up definitely. I'll be looking forward to see you on the jury soon.
Same. Also, thank you very much for the talk. All the best, Ake.
It's been a pleasure. So that's it for this edition of UX Conversations. I hope that you enjoyed our talk and enjoyed hearing from Oliver about his opinions, insights, and also recommendations as well. So if you want to see more about our interviews, content, events, and of course about the awards, jump to uxdesignawards.com or follow us on YouTube or LinkedIn or social media as well. Until next time, take care and see you soon again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.